Welcome to another episode of The Human Way. Today we're talking with Michael Harvey, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Quora, a global digital agency. But quite frankly, we spent most of our time talking about some of the distinct and offbeat choices that he's made over the course of his personal and professional lives. Most notably, this man spent 4 years sailing the open water with his family and 2 young children on a 40-foot boat. When you do things like that, you learn a lot about what it means to commit to your decisions, to make plans and prepare for those. Not just right off in the moment, but long-term plans, and how you take some of the calculated risks and understand how to go with the flow. We spent a lot of time talking about what it means to leave a clean wake, which is certainly important to do literally, but also figuratively in life, and how you leave a clean wake with the people you interact with in your personal and professional lives. So it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get rolling. Hey, Michael, thank you for being a guest on the show today.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited as well. And you know, audience doesn't know this, but this has been some time in the works.
Right.
Had to reschedule a couple times. You know, my wife had an appendectomy. You had some work conflicts and stuff. So I'm happy that we could get on here. And just so the audience knows, the reason why I'm excited is because we met maybe a couple months ago now at an event I was doing. And in further conversation, getting to know a little bit more about you, you have an interesting story because you've got a successful business career. But then I think you've also got these sort of interesting experiences in life that I know people are going to be excited to hear about. So just real quick, if you want to mind, Michael, just tell the audience a little bit about, you professionally or who you are a little bit, and then we'll get into it from there.
Sure. Okay, great. Yeah. And Matt, I've enjoyed listening to some of the issues or episodes on your podcast. And a lot of your guests kind of come at the topic of leadership and business in a fairly direct way. And I'm thinking that we could maybe do it in a little bit more of an oblique way, but sort of the standard career story would be, I think it's a pretty conventional career, except for some of the pieces we'll touch on here. Yeah. So I'm an engineer by training from Stanford. I did a couple years on Wall Street and then ended up going to this company that at the time nobody had heard about, Microsoft. And that's kind of where I got into the tech world, and specifically on the product side. So I went there as a product manager. And then shortly after we started a family, I left Microsoft and started consulting for some of the early internet companies. So we're talking kind of early 90s, mid 90s. So in Seattle, where I was, there was a very exciting time to be. Amazon had just started. They weren't one of my clients, but that kind of got me into that. And then I had this break in my career, and I know we'll touch on that in a moment. And when I resumed, I kind of went back to that technology and product side, and that ultimately led to the position and company where I am now. So I work at a company called Quora. I've been there for about 12 years, which is a pretty long time to have a be at one place these days.
Yep.
I joined as COO, and we grew from a very small, 5 people in the US, 15 people in India, to a couple hundred today. I was responsible for all of our delivery functions. So we're a systems integrator and digital agency. And so I did that for about 10 years. And then more recently started this role as Chief Strategy Officer there. And what's great about that is I get to talk about all of the really interesting stuff that's happening in tech right now. And so I hope that's one of the topics that we might get into is kind of everything that's going on in the tech world.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much happening in the tech world. So I don't know, I don't know if we'll have time for that, Michael. No,
yeah, we could do a whole episode just on that.
But that's the professional sort of career path and story. And as you and I were talking, here I am. Obviously, the title, COO and Chief Strategy Officer. Yeah. You've reached the higher levels of leadership at organizations that a lot of people would aspire to or be working every day towards. But then you started talking to me about this sort of like adventurous lifestyle, and I'm stereotyping here, okay, but I generally don't view people who have been like successful to that degree and then world traveler adventurer.
Right.
it happens. It does
Right.
happen, but it's not like the common thing that I think of. So I really got very, interested in your story from there. So you mentioned this sort of break, this break that you
Right.
had in careers.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what that break was all about and what you did.
Okay, so just a little bit of backstory. So I grew up and went to college, and I had no intention of ever getting married in my entire life. And then I met my wife as at a semester abroad kind of thing. We fell in love immediately. I was engaged in college, and so, but then I for sure wasn't ever going to have kids, and I could see just what a burden they were and how they tied you down and all of that. And my wife, who ultimately did want to have kids, she did this very clever thing. She got me a book. You can still find it in print. It's called Adventuring with Children by this woman named Nan Jeffries. And so her kind of backstory was she traveled extensively, met her husband, they traveled extensively, and then they had twins. And so they just started traveling with their twins when they were, infants, and kind of in contrast to here's the best Graco crib that folds up and fits in an overhead. They were all about you plop them down in a basket with a wooden spoon and wherever their stuffed animal is for the night, that's home. Yep. So anyway, my wife gave me this book, and what she was doing was telling me that we could have kids, but we would still go on adventures together. And so we sort of made this little trade where I agreed to have kids and she agreed to ultimately go on a long-term sailing trip with me. So we, right after we started having kids, we started getting a sailboat ready for ocean blue water cruising, it's called. And when our two daughters were 6 and 8, we set off from Seattle and we lived aboard for 4 years. We went around Vancouver Island, down the West Coast, through the Panama Canal, up the East Coast, into the Erie Canal, out the St. Lawrence Seaway, and basically ran out of time and money in Norfolk, Virginia, moved ashore, sold the boat, bought a house, and that's where we've been ever since. And, after we moved ashore, I bought a couple suits, started doing a little bit of networking, and kind of was able to jump right back into the workforce. And what's interesting is because of that time lapse, people were willing to see me as an executive. So I was able to step in as an executive to a software startup and kind of resume. Now, a lot of my friends, they're now retired VCs and things like that, and I'm still working away. But I think the trade was absolutely worth it. And one of the concepts that I'd like to explore with you is something that we really came to. It sort of gelled as a life philosophy for us during this trip, and it's called leaving a clean wake. And I think that sets up a way of thinking about our relationships, how we are in the world, how we are as bosses, as leaders. It kind of touches on all of those things. So I'd be excited to sort of go in that direction with you if you're game.
Oh no, of course I'm game. I got to back up first though, because I don't want to gloss over the fact that you said your daughters were 8 at the time.
6 and 8. Yeah. In fact, she wasn't even really 6. She was a couple weeks away from being 6. So technically 5 and 8.
so my daughters turned 8 this year. I have twins as well, like the lady from the book. And the amount of fear I would have of being stuck in a sailboat with children 6 and 8, right. Not for fear of their safety, just fear of my sanity.
Okay, interesting.
But so when you took off, did you know that this is going to be a 4-year journey, or was it just kind of like, we're going to see what happens?
Well, so apparently the trade I made, and alcohol was involved, I believe, but was for a second child would get me 6 months on the boat. And so Ginny, my wife, actually realized 6 months into the trip, we were somewhere in Mexico, that she had paid off Rhiannon, our younger daughter, but she agreed to keep going, which was great. But so you mentioned the word fear, and that's something that actually in your talk at the event where we met, you talked about fear of failure. And I think one of the things that people do, I'm also a big backpacker, and have been my whole life, and have been doing that with my kids since they were tiny. In fact, I'm doing a 105-mile trip this summer with my two daughters along the Uinta Highline Trail, which is along the crest of the Uinta Mountains in Utah. So awesome. This whole thing continues. My kids are now 27 and 25. So, it really pays off. But so that fear you mentioned, there's two kinds of fears that people have. And when you backpack, there's a phrase, packing for your fears. And this is the thing that causes people to take, like a surgical grade first aid kit with them and things like that. And so when we did these things, sailing would be one. We homeschooled both girls all the way to college, mostly my wife, but people had a lot of, not necessarily fear, but felt like it was risky. We had Rhiannon was born at home. Vienna was born, my older daughter, named after where I met my wife, she was born in Stockholm. So, people look at a home birth and feel like that's very risky. And so humans are really bad at assessing risk. So when we went sailing, people would ask, what about storms? What about pirates? And wouldn't even think to ask about, what about submerged shipping containers? Mm-hmm. That was the kind of stuff that I worried about. Or, somebody who didn't know how to set their anchor and their boat starts dragging down onto you. Those are the real risks. So people project their fears and react to those. And they do that in business. They do that in normal life. The kind of fear that you're talking about, I think, touches on this idea of preparation. Which is broadly applicable. So we didn't just jump right onto the boat. Some people do that, and their boats are for sale by the time they get to La Paz in Mexico. So we got the boat. I worked on it. I knew every single system on it. I could sail it blindfolded. We downsized from a big house to a small house. So we started living in smaller quarters. I went offshore with other skippers. My wife did the same thing. We sailed, my older daughter, Vienna, we took her sailing when she was 2 months old along the Mediterranean coast of Turkey. So it was a process of getting there. I think you're right. I think if you just jumped onto a 40-foot sailboat and set off, there would be situations where even today, if it was like Star Trek and they beamed you and me, Matt, down onto the boat, we'd both be, we're gonna die, know. So the idea then of living in that space, we already had worked up to that. And in fact, what's really cool about that is that the feeling of being underway at night, being on watch, because it was just my wife, right? We're trading watch on watch, knowing that my family is no more than 20 feet away from me, that they're asleep, and that literally all of our fates are in my hands and in my skill and in our boat. And then turning that over to my wife, the same thing. It was an incredibly powerful feeling that has stuck with us and helped define us as a family, really. And it's also broadly applicable to business. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of the importance of preparation and also being able to go with those forces that are larger than us.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think what you're highlighting is, people hear a story like yours, and I think they jump to, like this person did something that most people wouldn't think of, or really have maybe they might not have the skill to do it, but they might not have the will to do it. Mm-hmm, and right. And so, but what you're highlighting and what I think is really important is people oftentimes don't look at the preparation that was put into doing those mm-hmm, things.
Right.
And so the reaction is, oh my gosh, this right. person jumped on a boat and just started sailing, with their kids. Wow. That's right. Let alone this was something that you guys have been planning and building upon for years and years and years. And the other thing about fear is, I think we oftentimes fear what we don't know. So,
Absolutely.
so you mentioned something, and we have a pretty big homeschool community here where I live, and in fact, neighbors across the street homeschool their children. I mean, everybody got a crash course in homeschooling their children a little bit in this.
Oh my God,
year.
Yeah.
But you're right. Oftentimes we look at homeschooling, and there is this fear of, and I'm sure you've heard this, sure you heard the same things, right? People are scared, like, oh, well, will they be socially acclimated?
Right. Socialization.
Yeah. Like, will they be able to play sports or, whatever it is. Right. And when you really dive into it, and I haven't dived into it myself, I'm just having conversations with somebody else, across the street who has done it. It's like, oh, okay, well, there is actually lots of opportunities to do this. There's lots of research.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's that fear of, if you haven't experienced it yourself, there's this natural fear of, well, what is it? But once you jump in and you start experiencing whatever that subject might be, it becomes a lot less scary and a lot more realistic to accomplish. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so from if you had to box it in to a amount of years, how many years do you think it took from you saying I want to sail across the world with our family to when you guys first set sail?
Okay, so that's a fair question. So it evolves. So I mentioned going sailing early with Vienna when she was an infant, and so that evolved into how do we do this for a little bit longer, start chartering boats and things like that. And then I think it was again, Ginny, my wife, who we were on a sort of a camping trip, and there were boats anchored off the little spit we were on. And she said, I wonder how we could do this in a more committed way and do it for a longer period of time. And my response is, we got to get a boat. So I'm rubbing my hands. I'm like, woohoo. So it probably took 5 or 6 years from the, okay, let's really kind of start to get serious about this to, actually pushing off. You said a couple interesting things there when you were winding up to that question. So a lot of people imagine, you just jump onto the boat, but it's a very steep pyramid. So a lot of people, if they imagine it at all, it's like, okay, it's like going on a cruise, right? It's going to be this white glove, awesome, you're waking up in paradise every day. And that's not at all how it is. The highs are very high for sure, but the lows are also very, very low. And so the preparation to do that, really it took us a while to get there. But here's kind of the point I want to make, is that you can plan and prepare and get out your charts and get your compass out and do all this navigating and things like that. And as soon as you set off, as soon as we went out the Strait of Juan de Fuca and turned left, all your bets were off. Yeah. All of a sudden you're out in 40 knots of wind and 20-foot seas, and so the thing there is, you have to be able to prepare, assess risk, plan, but then go with the flow, because there are forces out there that are just much larger than you. And you can think about that very literally on a sailing trip. Yeah, you got generally which way the winds and the currents and the things like that go. One of our rules was never agree to meet somebody who was going to come visit us at a particular time and place, because you could not guarantee. And trying to get there could put you at risk. You sort of alluded to COVID without naming it. Talk about a massive force that none of us were planning on, that is obviously still with us. And there was no way to fight that, right? That came along, and all you could do was sort of react to that, hopefully in a way that worked. And I think the same is true in a business setting, where you plan, you prepare, you educate yourself, you organize, and then reality happens, and you have to be willing to sort of course correct, or even just go where it takes you. And one of the things you talk about, Matt, is reframing. and fear of failure. So you have to look at those things not as failures, but reframe them as opportunities that you're taking advantage of. And the great thing is, if you adopt that stance in the world, and it really is a stance in the world where you're striving for sort of radical acceptance of what is, then you get a lot of psychological freedom from that, but you also have experiences that you never could have planned for yourself.
Absolutely.
That actually are the things that you look back on and go, wow, that, wasn't that amazing? And you never could have concocted that yourself. But so it's that balance between you're prepared, you have the skills, you have, in the sailing case, you've got a boat that can do it, right? If you're going backpacking, you've got the right gear and the skills for that. But then you've got to be open to, oh, that's not a great place to go this year, but that place is really great, or let's go there. Or the monsoon didn't set up this year, so you can't go that way. You got to go that way. So
but what? Sorry to keep going back to things that you said, but you said earlier, like, well, that's kind of, if we're going to commit to doing this, first step is we got to buy a boat.
Yeah.
And when we think about preparation, when we think about being able to kind of go with wherever the wind takes you, and it's because you've committed to doing this, and you've planned well in advance for it. And I think more and more people need to assess whatever those things are in life, whether they're personal decisions, professional decisions, what's going to make them happy, things that are good for their family. And sometimes it's about just committing to this is gonna be a thing, and I'm going to commit to it, and I'm going to do what it takes. Because a lot of people, that's one of the reasons I asked why, like, how long it took you to kind of make this sort of commitment and decision, is because I had a lot of people that, my story that some people know is a 13-year corporate career. And then I, left to go be a speaker and a leadership coach and trainer. But a lot of people that I left the organization with, like, wow, you're just going to leave and go do that. Like, and a lot of it was, that's awesome. So happy for you. But what I always tell people is, this wasn't just, oh, I'm going to go try this thing out. This was a commitment I started to make about 4 or 5 years before that.
I think that's right.
And I had to take steps. I've done articles and stories about, like, what are those steps that I had to start taking. And so similar to what you're describing is life and success in business and our personal lives. It's certainly about preparation, but it's also about making a commitment that whatever these things are, these are going to be the important parts to get us there.
I think that's exactly right. And kind of, I started to talk a little bit about the pyramid, and that there's this steep pyramid. So you have sort of at the base, if you will, a lot of people who say, oh, I'd love to go off and be a public speaker. Actually, we know that's one of people's greatest fears. So maybe not exactly that one, but I'd love to go off and do X, right? And then there's the people who start trying to aim towards that. And then there's the people who get kind of part way, and then there's the small, and it's a minority who actually do it. And so again, in the sort of the blue water cruising scenario, you have people get all the way to, they have the boat there, they've got it set up so that it could actually do safe ocean sailing, but it's like, oh, I need one more season I'm going to install a new radar or something, and they just never quite get off the dock. And so, at the end of the day, whatever metaphor you want to pick, you prepare, you commit, you move down that path, and then you just have to untie the dock lines and go for it. Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier, kind of like as you're going through this concept of leaving a clean wake.
Yes.
And so for the the non-boaters, right, the wake is the waves behind you. But tell me a little bit about that. Is that sort of like a family mantra that you all adopted, or just something that you've learned and adopted personally?
No, that's a great question. It's a really rich topic. So it actually is a saying amongst the blue water cruising community to leave a clean wake. And it's superficially adjacent to things that in the outdoor community, like, I mentioned I'm a big backpacker, so leave no trace, right? Leave no trace principles, or take only photos, leave only footprints kind of thing. But those are much more prescriptive and tactical. Whereas leaving a clean wake is actually a philosophy of life and how to approach life that applies to, I think every aspect, your personal life, your relationships, your parenting, your life as a leader and a boss. And I think those other sayings, they miss the ultimate goal, which is, I don't think most of us don't want to leave a trace in our lives. I think we do want to leave a trace. And as we live and ultimately end our lives, we want to have built some kind of legacy, even if it's small. One of the things I'm really proud of, I mentioned our daughters are adults now. We got to their adulthood all still really liking each other.
That's a big win.
Oh, it's huge. And, they're going to be adults so much longer than their little kids, and we could do a whole episode on how when they become teenagers, that's the wrong time to, suddenly try and constrain their worlds. But
I will be calling you in 5 years.
If you've got 8, you got 4. For me, the magic years were 4 to 12. So, but anyway, so this concept of leaving a clean wake. So a wake is a really interesting thing because, as you said, it's sort of the trail in the water that a boat leaves behind it. And if you're a large boat, it can be a very large wake. If you're a small boat like ours, that wake is probably invisible. There's no trace of your passing after, let's say, 5 minutes or something like that. Maybe it lasts that long. And so there's the literal interpretation of, like, don't throw your plastic overboard, don't dump your pollutants or your holding tank or things like that. But the more philosophical concept is, leave that village where you anchored, where the people living there are happy to greet the next cruising boat that comes through. And when you apply that more broadly to life, it's like, how do I leave the world a better place? The environments that I'm moving through, and not just like environmentalism in the sense of I'm going to recycle, but almost this kind of karmic sense, right? Where I'm going to touch the people and places that are in my life, and I'm going to not leave a trail of wreckage and garbage behind me. So that's really the concept. And so I actually am working on a book, Leaving a Clean Wake, Life Lessons Learned While Living Aboard. I don't have it up yet, but that site, Leaving a Clean Wake, is going to be where I sort of embellish some of these ideas that we're talking about more. But so that's really the essence of it. And like I say, it's kind of a philosophy that really can orient one in the world. And it's something that my family has really embraced. So my younger daughter just got her dive master certification. She's working on coral reef conservation. My older daughter is budding environmentalist, a photographer. She's in the tech world as well, but so it's really stamped, that philosophy is really stamped our family. And it's also how I try to think about being a boss. So leaving a clean wake as a boss is things like, don't try to grab all the credit. Shine a spotlight on people who are doing a good job and highlight that. Don't burn clients, don't, negotiate in good faith, things like that. So it really is a broadly applicable concept. And it also touches on something else that you've gotten to with some of your guests, which is this idea of authenticity. And I actually think there's a deeper concept there that I would call being intentional, that ties into this. And that's a really important word to us. So even before we learned about leaving a clean wake as sort of the name for what we were trying to do, you mentioned homeschooling. We didn't just jump into homeschooling. We went to readings. David Gooderson, who wrote Snow Falling on Cedars, his first book was called Family Matters. they were both teachers, yet they decided to homeschool. And so we did a lot of that kind of preparation for that as well. And then on the boat, obviously there was no option, but even when we came ashore, we were constantly checking in. Is this still working for us? Is this still working for us? And you mentioned fears. People project a lot of fear onto homeschooling. Like you said, what about socialization? What about sports? And there's solutions to all those things. And in fact, in our experience, they're better solutions often than conventional schooling. But one point I want to make, with people looking at me, hopefully can tell I'm a fairly just, normal looking guy with a business career now. We did these things: homeschooling, going sailing. I mentioned home birth. The plan was for a midwife to be there. She was late, so I caught my second daughter.
like a football.
Exactly. And then I have no idea where this came from. Maybe they did this in old movies. I literally hung her upside down because I thought that's what you did. I did everything but call for the boiling water. But
that's awesome.
So we did all these things because we prepared and also felt that it was intentional. It was, and it created this authentic life for us, but doing it without being hippies. We didn't do it for kind of kooky reasons. When we were looking for midwives, it was really hard to find one who didn't want to come, with incense and crystals and Buddhist chants. We just wanted a medical professional who happened to do births at home. So that concept of being intentional, that ties right into leaving a clean wake as well. And I think if you can be intentional about things and really cleave to that, you end up with an authentic life. And even though you can't steer it, or not that you can't steer it, but you can't, predict it all. Yeah. You look back on it and you say, this all made sense, and I'm proud of this, and it all hangs together.
So I'm curious what you do, Michael, because this idea of being intentional is very important, but it's also, I think it's hard sometimes. I think it's hard to figure out the right way to be intentional, or how to go about how to go about it. And I'll just give you an example. One of the things that I do, and I've just recently picked this up, it was actually from an event that I went to, is my intentionality for the day starts with journaling. And I don't spend a lot of time doing it. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even do it every day, because sometimes I'm not intentional about it.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is set my intention for that day. And if I wake up right in the morning, right when your thoughts are fresh and what is ahead to your day, what I found is that I can really kind of hone in on what's the most important part of this day, whether that's work, family, both of those things,
right?
A feeling, an emotion that I need to carry with me. And then I try to review it then at the end of the night and ask myself, well, what choice did I make? Did I make the choice to follow through in these things? So that's one thing that's been helping me be more intentional. But I'm curious, somebody like yourself, is there any, if you had advice or something that works for you, how do you be intentional to the point where you've obviously accomplished all these things because of that intentionality? Is there something that you use or do?
Well, so I'm a big journaler as well, and my goal would be to do it every day. It's amazing when you look back at some of these adventurers from the 19th century or something. Somehow they found time at the end of their day, which must have been much harder, lugging their canvas gear and their giant cameras around. But they found an opportunity to write down what they did and how much they spent and all of that. And I think it's a shame that people, historians looking back in 50 years, they're going to be hard pressed to find some of that stuff. So one thing for me is that if you can clarify what your intentions are, then you can simplify, and things start to fall by the wayside. And so just a powerful example of that for me, back to sailing, was once we decided to go sailing, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go do a rock climbing trip with him. And I was like, I don't, because that no longer supports the path I'm on. And so I think you can be intentional kind of at different scales. There's the minute to minute, day to day, week to week, and then those larger scales. I think a challenge, and I feel this deeply, that all of us face now is that our attention, let alone our intentions, our attention is just buffeted by, a lot of it in sort of mediated by these digital technologies that we've all sort of invited into our life for reasons that initially made sense. Facebook, because it allows me to connect with friends and see when they have babies or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the average person is spending 50 minutes a day on Facebook and then Instagram, and so the act of what you're doing, of trying to say, what is it that's important? What is it that I'm trying to accomplish today? And having some sense of your deepest values and using that as a tool to try and simplify. There's a movement out there that I really like. It's called digital minimalism. And that whole idea, there's a book that's actually called Digital Minimalism, written by a computer scientist whose previous book was called Deep Work. And I would commend both of these books to your listeners, because it is all about what you're talking about there, is how do I figure out what's important to me and really bring focus to that. And it's so hard to do now, and just the ideas of a digital Sabbath, or, I'm turning off notifications or so, that's not sufficient, right? We have to somehow be able to figure out, here are my deepest values and here's how I bring that stuff into alignment. So I don't really have a checklist answer for you there, other than to acknowledge it's a real struggle, but it's a struggle worth taking on.
No, but I think you did answer that, because what I heard you say, and what I believe as well too, is sometimes we got to step back and ask ourselves really intentionally, and sometimes we got to get really deep into it to ask ourselves what's important.
Mm-hmm.
What's important to us.
Yep.
What sort of wake do we want to leave? And
exactly. Yeah.
And then from there, we've got to make sure that our actions, our time, our mental energy is primarily focused on those things.
That's correct. That's right.
We're not always going to always do those types of things. We're going to have to sometimes, do some stuff we don't want to do, maybe. But being intentional about, your example of, I can't go rock climbing now because, quite frankly, that's getting in the way of what's the biggest priority or the most important thing to me and my family right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we got to be a little more comfortable doing that. So
yeah. Well, rewinding all the way to your comments about commitment, is like, once you fully commit to something, then the things that are extraneous become very clear, and it actually becomes much easier to just say no to things. I think when we're in our workaday world and we're just caught up and like I said, I think being buffeted really is not too strong a term for that. It's harder to sort of get a handle on, what are the things that I want to be intentional about, that I want to commit to, and allowing the rest of it to kind of, slide away, to say no to things. I think simplifying is very hard, but when you really commit, I think it becomes much easier to then kind of simplify from there. And then you look back and you say, oh yeah, that all makes sense. One other, another interesting point that I think touches on this, and again, it ties into this idea of awake, which is these larger forces. So you prepare, you assess your risks, you think through, what am I going to do if I hit a shipping container? Like, what are the real risks? Okay, pirates is not what I'm going to worry about. And then you go with the flow, and the winds at a given time of year, they flow in a particular direction. The currents tend to go in a particular direction. So you're working with that. You stay in port when there's a storm, even though you want to go visit your parents who are showing up in Mexico, kind of thing. But what's really interesting is that even with all of those forces at play that you're kind of hitching onto, your actual wake, like the physical wake through the water, even though hundreds and thousands maybe of seafarers have been following that same current, that same wind current. The ocean is so vast, and let's use that as a metaphor for life here, that the exact spot you're in, chances are almost infinite that no one has been exactly there before. And the reason I think that is such a cool idea is that gets back to the idea that all of us are going to live entirely unique lives. Mm-hmm. No one is going to live your life for you. You're not going to live anyone else's life. You know, everybody's subjectivity is just as vivid as yours, but the path that you're going to take is unique. And if you really can bring all these ideas together, sort of my deep values, being intentional, leaving a clean wake, and so forth, then that all starts to add up to something that is really coherent, that you're proud of, that you know applies to all of the realms that you live in as a person.
So as you just said that, I was reminded of a story. This was 10 years ago in my corporate career. As I was kind of like, you know, working my way up the organization, so to speak, I had a mentor leader of mine that just said, hey, you know, just pay attention to what kind of you're doing, and don't worry about other people and their paths. Like if somebody leapfrogs you for a job that you thought you should get, just know that that's their path. It's not yours. Yeah. And he's like, and if you can like adopt that and really, really take it to heart, he's like, I guarantee you're going to live a happier life. You're going to live. Oh yeah. You'll do better, you know, and it's so true. Right. And I think it also, you know, helps you from those relationship standpoints, like, not being upset when somebody it's you're able to celebrate other people and their successes and the things that they do without having to look at them and say, oh man, I wish I had that. That's right. You know, and there's an interesting distinction between envy and jealousy that a lot of people miss. Jealousy is where you don't want somebody to have something. Envy is where you would like to have that thing too. So, you know, but both of those can be sort of that comparing yourself to others. Oh my God, that can lead to such, you know, unnecessary unhappiness but like you said, it's your path. Like, you're the only person that's living this life. You're the only person that's in this spot in the ocean. You're the only person that's looking up at that star tonight. You know, like we have this opportunity if we step back to realize that we're pretty unique, and that's why we're pretty cool people. That's why individuals as humans, we are really interesting, unique characters. And Michael, you in particular, you've made some very distinct and offbeat choices throughout your life and your career, but they have been absolutely fascinating. And I do feel like we could go on and talk more and more about these, but you've mentioned the hike you're doing this summer. You've mentioned writing a book coming up. Yep. What's next for you? Where are we going to find you on the adventure path and road?
Okay, well, like I say, out there in the true adventuring world, big trip this summer. I try and really get out there and you know, do something at least significant every year or so. The highest peak in Utah, it's about 13,500 feet. So I'm anticipating standing on top of that sometime in, let's say, August 20th or thereabouts. I'm really excited about some of the things that are happening in tech right now. Curiosity is such a important part of me. One of the reasons that we homeschooled was to try and preserve that curiosity that I think we're all born with. And so there are some mega trends that have really come together in the tech world right now, that, you know, cloud computing and ubiquitous mobile computing, and all of us walking around with smartphones in our supercomputers in our pockets. So I'm looking forward to the resumption of physical events and being able to go out there and talk about those things, which is in my role as Cora's chief strategy officer. I get to point at a lot of those things for our internal staff, for prospects, for clients. And that's just really getting going. We're kind of at the forefront of that. And so, I've got my physical adventuring that I've got, and then sort of this career adventuring that I'm really fortunate to be able to do now as well.
Well, Michael, I appreciate the time and this conversation. For those listening, I know for me, leaving a clean wake is certainly something I'll be taking away from this conversation, and not just in the literal boating term, but in the relationships that we have, how we interact and leave the people and the situations we're in better when we move forward. And I'm gonna kind of go back myself and ask myself kind of what I'm committing and planning to, because, Michael, one of the things I didn't tell you when we started this is last year during COVID, most of my close friends know this. My wife and I are very close. We're like that people who are starting to plan but haven't committed yet to selling the home and buying one of those vans, that you could live in, and
van life,
and drive through the country.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I might have to, after this conversation, just commit to actually purchasing one, because I'm at that point where it's like, well, if we're going to do this, I'm going to have to get a van first.
Yep. I agree. And what a fun thing to research. And I don't know if you're like me, but man, I love gear and doing all that. You're going to get it. In all seriousness, there's a concept called overlanding. If you haven't discovered that, look that up. It's in a van that can get into the backcountry. Absolutely fascinating. I think that's going to be one of my next moves. So overlanding, definitely check that out. But I highly encourage you. And frankly, your kids are a perfect age for this. And if you do this, Matt, they are going to thank you, and you're going to reap the rewards of that for your entire lives together.
That's it. I'm committing. Michael. It's
all right.
done.
I'm going to check. I'm checking back in 3 months.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time, Michael. Everybody listening, please let us know what you took from this episode. Leave it in the comments wherever you're listening or watching, and just continue to get ready for some more fun guests. Michael Harvey, thank you so much for your time, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Matt. I really, really enjoyed it. Take care.